Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to the Women Air Force Service Pilots program this afternoon. The 2010 Dole Leadership Prize was made possible with the support of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the U.S. and its Ladies Auxiliary. We give our special thanks to the Heart of America wing of the commemorative Air Force. It really is an honor for us to recognize our women pilots. The Dole Leadership Prize is a $25,000 prize that is awarded annually to an individual or a group whose public service inspires others. This year's cash award in honor of the Women Air Force Service Pilots of World War II will be given to Texas Women's University to enhance the online availability of the Wasp collection. Texas Women's University is home to the Wasp National Archives and is an integral facilitator of the Wasp legacy. The Wasp are the first group to receive the Dole Leadership Prize. All of the other recipients have been single recipients. Between 1942 and 44, at the height of World War II, more than 1,000 women left their homes and jobs for the opportunity of a lifetime to become the first in the history to fly for the United States military. They volunteered as civilian pilots in an experimental Army Air Corp program to see if women could serve as pilots and relieve men for overseas duty. Originally, 25,000 women applied to the program. 1,830 were accepted, and 1,074 graduated from training. These women became the first women Air Force service pilots of World War II, better known as WASP. Under the determined leadership of Jacqueline Cochran, Nancy Harkness Love, and General Henry Hap Arnold, the WASP succeeded beyond all expectations. Today I will introduce three of the women who will be representing the entire 1,074 WASP group for the program today. But we also have other WASP with us today, and I would like to recognize them. Please stand if you're able, or raise your hand so people will be able to see you and recognize you. The first one, Thelma Miller.
My daughter.
Betty Jo Reed. You can do it again. You can do it again. There you go.
There you did it!
All right. Marjorie Reese. Very nice.
Right?
Lucille Wise. Mariana Weil. Millicent Young. And last but not least, Pat Young. I would like to then introduce the three WASP that will be representing all of the WASP this afternoon. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge one other person. We have George J. Dunmore here. Could you please stand? Mr. Dunmore is representing the Tuskegee Airmen Heart of America chapter, and he's the Vice President for Public Relations Officer. Welcome. For our three women, first starting with Bernice B. Haydu. Bernice Haydu was born December the 15th, 1920 in Bradley Beach, New Jersey. On February 12, 1944, B arrived at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas to begin training with the WASP. After graduation, she was assigned to Pecos Air Force Base in Pecos, Texas, the training base for the UC-78. Following deactivation of the program in December 1944, she earned her flight instructor's and ground school ratings. She flew freelance ferrying surplus aircraft from bases in the south to the north. Together with the help of Colonel Bruce Arnold, son of General Hap Arnold, Senator Barry Goldwater, Congresswoman Lindy Boggs, and Margaret Heckler, as well as WASP around the country, The women pilots of World War II would finally gain their veteran status in 1977. Earlier this year, she and her family were in attendance for the gold medal ceremony in our nation's capital, honoring the Women Air Force Service pilot. Next, I would like to introduce Jean McCreary. Jean McCreary was born on April 28, 1924 in Troy, Ohio. Her first flight was with a barnstormer at the age of 5. When she was a freshman at Ohio University, she enrolled in ground school training under the civilian pilot training program at the Treaty City Airport in Greenville, Ohio, with a group of friends from Waco Aircraft Company in Troy. Jean got her private pilot certificate in December 1943 and entered the Wasp program in May 1944. On December the 2nd, 1944, her particular class, 44 women, the 10th class, was the last class to graduate at Avenger Field. Jean and 68 of her classmates received their wings from General Henry Hap Arnold. I would like to say she went on. She married and she had 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls. Okay, and for 38 years, they remained centered in their home. I don't know where else she could go, but when we look at that. But earlier this year, her family joined her in the nation's capital for the gold medal ceremony, honoring the Women Air Force Survey pilots. She remained committed to educating others about the WASP and the role they played during World War II with presentation and talks to groups of all ages.
Who wrote that?
Our next recipient is Don Seymour. Don Seymour was born July 1, 1917 in Rochester, New York. While pursuing a BS degree at Cornell University, Don joined the civilian pilot training program, soloed on skis, and earned her private pilot's license in May 1940. In March 1943, Don entered the WASP program with class 43 and 5, 5th class, the first class to complete all their training at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas. She completed the B-17 combat pilot training course at Lockbourne Air Force Base, Ohio, as first pilot, and was assigned to Buckingham Army Air Field in Fort Myers, Florida, a flexible gunnery school. During her time at Buckingham, Don flew the B-17F and the B-17G in aerial gunnery missions up and down the range over the Gulf of Mexico. She flew range estimation missions in the AT-6 and the target towing in the B-26. She is presently a community volunteer. Don has also been active in the WASP post-war organization, serving as the national president from 82 to 84, advisor and national chairman of memorials. Earlier this year, Don also attended the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony in Washington, D.C. with her family, where all the WASP received the highest honor awarded by Congress. Could I have an applause for all 3 of the women, please? I'd just like to add, it was indeed an honor for me just to read your bios, and I had to skim through some. So please go back and read everything that I didn't, because they certainly deserve that recognition. Joining our 3 women today will be Katherine Landok. Dr. Katherine Landok is an associate professor of history and director of oral history at Texas Woman's University. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in history and political science at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where she was an NCAA Division I soccer player. She earned her master's and PhD in history from the University of Tennessee. She's also a Guggenheim Fellow at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in 2000 and is a private pilot. In addition to her academic work, Landok has written for several aviation publications and is a regular presenter at the Experimental Aircraft Association in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, each summer. She began her research on the Women Air Force Service pilots of World War II in 1993. Her work, which began out of curiosity about the women pilots, grew into her master's thesis, then her doctoral dissertation, and she is now working on her manuscript, Against Prevailing Winds, the Women Air Force Service Pilots in American Society. Landok is a recognized expert on the Wasp, and she was recently consulted for and featured in an NPR Morning Edition show on the women. Round of applause from Ms. Landok as well.
All right, Katie.
This point of our program, I'm looking forward to it, as I know you are, and I would like to recognize Bill Lacey, Director of the Dole Institute of Politics, who will interview these women. Dole, Bill Lacey.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you. There's someone else that I want to recognize before we get started here today, because Texas Woman's University has been a great partner on this entire effort. Sherilyn Bird, where are you? There you are, back in the back. A little applause for Sherilyn from Texas Women's University. And Kate, why don't you start out and tell us what TWU is going to use the gift for, the $25,000 cash gift?
Well, as you know, Bill, TWU has been the official archives of the WASP since the early 1990s, and that's where I've been able to do all my research, because the WASP send their materials there. And the money is going to be used to update their website and the online materials, make it more modern, more accessible to researchers. All of you can go to twu.edu and find out more about the WASP, and it's just going to be a wonderful thing.
Okay, great. Tell us, let's start today, Kate. Tell us a little bit about aviation right before the war, right before these ladies got into the service.
Well, aviation in the 1930s, of course, was so different than today. Everybody in this audience would fit in perfectly in the 30s. It was the golden age of aviation. Everyone loved it. It was in all the movies. It was in all the books. Everyone was just passionate about aviation and airplanes and the potential that it had for the future. And that's the age in which these women grew up. It was everywhere. The barnstormers flying into the fields to give a ride and getting sponsorships for different things. And air races were more popular than football or any other sport. It was just the way of the times.
Well, Bea, Dawn, and Jean, tell us a little bit about your experiences in aviation actually before the WASP.
Well, I guess I'm the oldest. I
I'm
was
next to the
10
oldest,
years
so.
old when Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic. And I remember not being able to sleep the night he crossed because he disappeared from Floyd Bennett, and we wasn't heard from again, maybe by a fishing boat outside of Ireland, and then he landed in Paris to this tumultuous, absolutely tumultuous audience of Europeans who went crazy about him, and he brought this whole idea of aviation front and center. I was in 5th grade, so that's a wonderful experience to have. Jackie Cochran didn't start flying until the 30s, and she became a racing pilot, and she's our mentor. She's our leader. She's the one who opened the door for women to fly military airplanes, because she had the ear of Hap Arnold, the commanding general of the Army Air Forces. And we just came, I stop. I'll tell that later.
Well, I grew up in Troy, and she said Waco, but in Troy it's Waco. And a lot of the early pilots had Wacos, and they're still being built, and they're still flying them. So it's flying over my town. And this one guy, Daredevil Brusman, $5 a ride. My mother wouldn't do it, but my grandmother did. My grandmother and I got in the plane, and we took this ride, and I thought, this is for me. So then I went, because I have to learn everything the hard way. I went home and I thought, well, gee, if that works, why can't I jump out of the barn with an umbrella? Don't try that at home. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I was the right age, the right time. I was from nowhere, Ohio, and look where I am today. Look at this.
Bea?
I don't want to disappoint you, but I did not think about flying until I was 22 years old. I was a Depression baby. I had a brother that was 11 months older than I, and there just wasn't enough money to send both of us to college. And this always made me very sad. And I was out in the working world, and one day I said, just stop feeling sorry for yourself and do something about it. I learned that they were giving night courses at the Newark College of Engineering, and one of the courses was aviation. And I figured that aviation was here to stay, so I'll take that course. Well, it turned out that it was a course to teach you what you needed to know for your written examination for your private pilot's license. So when I got through, I thought, this sounds interesting. I think I'll try flying and see what it looks like. At that time, the war was on, and in New Jersey, the northern part of New Jersey, you could not fly civil aircraft. So the instructor had moved his flight school from Teterboro, New Jersey, to Martins Creek, Pennsylvania. So on weekends, vacation time, so forth, I would take the Greyhound bus to Pennsylvania and started flying. And the first time I was up, that was it. I was hooked. So that's how I got started for desire of a further education.
How did the three of you come to join the Wasp? And I know, Jean, you've got a great story about your physical.
I only tell you this to tell you that women were not always treated like you might expect. In fact, it didn't happen to anybody. That's what I want to know, is why it didn't happen to anybody else.
You're special, Jean.
We had to have a physical, and they did guys. You know, they examined guys all the time. Well, I come in, and they don't really know what to do with me, but I still have to have a physical. So they get me in this gown, like we all have been there, and they get me up on this table. I was 19. I didn't have the faintest idea what was going to happen to me. Believe it or not, I didn't know what they were going to do. So I get this exam, and the guy, I'm so embarrassed. I'm just terrible. I get down off the table, and he says, well, okay. He says, you kids are playing at war. You boys and girls, you're out there. You all want to be a pilot and so on. He said, just remember, when you get out and you get married and the war is over, that a doctor at Patterson Field told you you might not be able to have children. If I could find that man's name in the record. I have 10 children, and 2 of them are sitting right over there. And you know, why did they lie to me?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about how I started in flying, because I didn't really think much about it. I was always adventuresome, had climbed trees as a kid, that sort of thing, and I always wanted to know what was around the bend and what the next hill. And had volunteered in a test in Cornell University, and all of a sudden one day this man who did all the instrumentation said, would you like to learn to fly? He said, we're starting the CPT program, the Civilian Pilot Training Program, and I'm going to be director of research, flight research, to find out how we can cut down the time it takes to be a pilot if the pilot didn't qualify. So I said, sure, and I'd never been up, Dr. Parmenter, and he took me up on a golden October day when the air was full of sunshine in a yellow Cub, and my goodness, it was love at first sight. I loved it. And then, of course, that goes on. I finished the course soloed on skis on a winter day, and they had to use boiling water to unlock the skis from the ice and snow. And it was so wonderful. I came across the letter the other day, and it said, Pete came in, and I didn't expect to solo that day on skis. I thought, this is sort of different. You know, I won't solo today. And he said, okay, take her around, but remember, she's not a balloon. Handle her gently. And so I did, and I squealed for joy, because he was a huge man. All of a sudden, you're in the airplane all by yourself, and they had that wonderful feeling of, oh, and then of course you said, oh, I have to land it. So, but I didn't find out later that I didn't even think about there's no brakes on when you have skis. So that's how I started.
I think you wanted to know how we got to Sweetwater.
Kind of how you wound up in the Wasp, and yeah.
Well, information got around, and there were notices in the newspaper that they were interviewing for the Wasp program. And there were several of us flying at Martins Creek, so several of us did apply, and 6 of us managed to get into the same class together. But during you're telling a story about the flying, during our flying in the Taylorcraft, which is what we were flying at Martins Creek, one of my friends, we were all student pilots and we were not supposed to fly together, but we had an instructor that was very mischievous, and he said, why don't you girls read up on how to do a loop? So we read up on how to do a loop. And then he arranged for me to hide in the woods while she taxied by on one of her solo flights, and I snuck in the airplane, and the two of us went up and we said, we're going to do a loop. So there we are, and said, okay, you do the throttle and I'll do the wheel. And we're up there and we're, reading the book and trying to do a loop. Got all the way halfway up. Of course, we split us out, but we were just laughing our heads off. We've had so much fun. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The six of us that did apply did go together to Sweetwater and start our program there.
Imagine, it's a lot.
Amazing, just a great story. Kate, how did the training program begin and how did it change over time?
Well, when they initially began the training program, you had some women that were already flying in the WAFs. They were ferry pilots, they were high-time pilots, and Jacqueline Cochran recognized that women could do more. And let's use the war as an opportunity to experiment and see what women can do as pilots. And so they started the training program, and they began it in Houston, Texas. And the first 3 classes did most of their training there. But the weather was so bad. Now, I live in Texas, so when you talk to Texas people, they're like, oh, yeah, Houston. But it's very foggy down there. The fog rolls in, the fog rolls out. The women down there waited a lot. And they got very behind on their training just because of the weather. So they moved out to Sweetwater, Texas, which is where Boone Pickens is doing the wind farms. Up here, you all know about that. There's nothing out there. It's kind of like a lot of Kansas, right? I grew up in Omaha, so I can. They moved out to Sweetwater, and they changed the number of hours that the women needed as they came in. Initially, they had to have over 200 hours and a high horsepower rating. And as time went on, they took women with less time because they got more proficient in the training. The training got longer over time. Ended up being 6 months. So when you meet WASP, that's an interesting thing, is find out what class they were in, because their training experience was different. If they were in one of the earlier classes or one of the later classes, they really did experiment, just as they did with the male cadets, to see what worked better and what didn't. They'd change the airplanes that they used and the amount of time they needed, whether they had instrument training or not. So it really is important to find out which class they were in to find out what their individual experience was.
Okay, a question for the 3 WASP, and I want each of you to respond to this. What is your best memory from either training or active duty?
Well, I'll be right now. I flew today in 19, right there, with a very hot pilot and in the back seat, and I saw your 360-degree horizon where the earth meets the sky, and I'm telling you, it reminded me of Texas, and I was thinking about my primary instructor, and I thought he couldn't see back there because we sat in the front seat. So that's the plane we started with, 160 horsepower, and it wiggles, it really is light. So it was fun. It's a good memory.
Very good.
I guess one of the most vivid memories I have is our training, because we started out in the Stearman, and that is because they were trying to see if they could eliminate one of the phases of training. It used to be primary, basic, advanced, and they decided to see if they could eliminate the basic training, and that's why they selected the Stearman, because it has a narrow landing gear and tends to ground loop, which is also the characteristic of the AT-6. So we got about 70 hours in the Stearman, and then we went directly, which is 220 horsepower, directly into the AT-6, which is 650 horsepower. And you had controllable pitch prop, retractable gear, flaps, radio, and all these goodies that the Stearman did not have. So it was quite a jump. And I would say that during all of our training, every phase of our training, we were always afraid that we might wash out. I mean, that was the biggest fear. Pardon me. So because you got two, in each phase, you got two check rides. One was the civilian check ride, and the other one was the Army check ride. And nobody wanted to wash out. But my most vivid memory beyond that was receiving my wings. That was the proudest day of my life.
Gene?
Well, that's always a great day for all of us. But anybody that's a pilot here knows when you land the plane and step out of it, it's a good day.
Did you have a favorite memory other favorite memory you wanted to share?
Oh, yeah. Things happened, and I got through them. That's good. All right, we were flying west on the Western long trip, and they said, don't fly over 10,000 feet because you don't have any oxygen. Okay, 2 mountains right here, clouds right here, hole here, nothing up there, but it's, I look at that hole, and I think just as sure as I fly through there, that's going to all close in, and I'm going to have a piece of the mountain. Then I saw a Navy plane go over the top. I thought I can do anything he can do. I had the worst headache when I came down you ever believe. But I did it.
Yeah.
38 Wasp died during training or during active duty. Dawn, I know you were very much involved in recognizing them. Tell us, a little bit about their story, and then I want Bea and Jean to comment on that as well.
We were just beginning night flight at Sweetwater, and there had been a crash the day before, and our first pilot that I knew of, Jane Champlin, and her instructor were killed, and nothing was said on the base. No reason for the accident, no explanation, only her girls in her bay had her bed mattress was just rolled up. And this happened just before we graduated, AT-17, the twin engine was, and the girls in that and our instructors. She was my best friend, Peggy Sipe, and Helen Severson were both killed with the instructor. And Peggy had left a garden, the only person at Sweetwater who had planted any flower seeds. She'd watered it and taken care of it, and then the day we graduated, on the September 11th, the flowers were in bloom. And so years later, this memory attached to me, and I realized that it's needed to always recognize the people who lose their lives in wartime, anytime, accidents included. And sure enough, we counted up, and it was 38 women in training and in service. And many were with instructors, many were engine failures, who knows? The reports were simplified, lots of black ink on the accident reports. And I have a booklet it's in print from the Texas Women's University, if anyone's interested in it, in their memory. And also, because I was a memorial chair, we have memorials all over the country to the 38 and to the Wasp for their service. It's unusual places. There's one in Midland, Texas, at the Confederate Air Force, and commemorative Air Force, and right in the Jimmy Doolittle Garden, one at Sweetwater, one at the Wright-Patterson, one at High Ground in Wisconsin, the one in Dayton, Texas, Dayton, Ohio, and in New York and in Washington. So there is a route there. We owe them something. They're forever young, and I salute them. Thank you for listening.
I'd like to add to that. I've just moved to Oklahoma, and I'm working in the Will Rogers Museum. So I've had to do some research on his life, and I'm talking to the man in the library, and he says, wait a minute. And he goes and brings this book back, and it was the Dawes report proving Cherokee blood. And here's a picture of a wasp. And I said, for heaven's sake, Will Rogers' sister's granddaughter was Betty Pauline Stein. Mm-hmm. And she was killed on that same last trip, the one that
Isn't that amazing?
me.
Amazing.
And
So we're still finding information.
It tells you goes around, comes around. But he was very interested in flying. He promoted it. I'm sure all of you that are as old as I am know that. But to see her face,
Yes.
and
And here we are. Thank you, guys.
Okay, how was this program, why was it disbanded and how did that occur? Kind of give us a little bit of the history there.
Well, it's, the final disbandment was in December 20th of 1944, and all the World War II folks in the crowd know that that was in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge, and it would seem that not the right time. What had happened was they tried to militarize the Wasps. They tried to bring them into the military because they're technically civilians working for the Army Air Forces. They tried to bring them in, and the hearings before Congress were in June of 1944. Of course, you have D-Day and the invasion and all of that going on in June of 44. And so the timing of it all just didn't work out right. And there was a lot of concern about money being spent to train girls to fly when all these boys were going to come back and be able to fly for them. So their gender definitely was the primary issue, the idea of women flying. Women could release men for duty, but they could not replace men. You see the distinction? It was okay if you were going to be Rosie the Riveter and take a fellow's spot if he could go to war. But if you were just keeping him out of the job, and especially out of the cockpit of an airplane, then that was completely unacceptable. And so that was a big part of it.
Ladies, what were your thoughts when you heard that the program was going to be disbanded?
Sad, very sad. We had been promised, and we had to take an oath, and we were trained to be military. We lived the military life. We were under military orders, and so we fully expected to become military. We were told that we can't take this training and then just walk away. We have to stay in. So when suddenly we find this out, it was devastating because we wanted to stay in and continue flying. So it was very sad.
I was flying the B-17 and realized that as we went through the war, the aircraft changed, B-29s were coming, and the B-17 was being put into mothballs. Even then, this is 44 late. And so I think we accepted it as just part of the war. We all wanted to get through the war and finish the war and have surrender and go on with our own lives. And so you buried it. I buried it. I just tucked it away, and it didn't come out until Sally Van Wagner-Kyle started to write her book in the 70s. I'd put everything in. I didn't even have a photo of myself, and lots, of course, the men didn't either. We didn't talk about the war afterwards. But it left a mark. And when that trunk opened and I saw these things, and I realized it's just because we were women, you know, it didn't quite get through. That's why the gold was so important. It finished the circle. It completed it, and we feel good. We feel good. Thank you.
now I pretty much feel the same as Dawn, because we wanted to go home and have normal lives, be able to leave your lights on at night, be able to drive a car, not have rationing. We wanted to be normal people. We were marriage age.
Get
all
the
of us.
shooting over with.
Have kids. And obviously I overdid that one. But in any case, that's what we were after, and we didn't talk about it. And to add to that, my husband was a Navy pilot, and I never opened my mouth. So
I don't believe you.
ask them. He said, what flew over? When we were living near the field? I said, as long as it's not the stork, I don't care.
Oh, dear.
Well, our country underappreciated your contribution. The Wasp did incredible things during the war. B, I know that you've been very deeply involved in efforts to get recognition for the Wasp. Tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll ask Dawn and Jean to comment as well.
Without Colonel Bruce Arnold, who was General Arnold's son, I don't think we could have accomplished what we did in 1977. He knew that it was his father's dream to have us recognized as veterans and to be veterans of World War II. At that time, we weren't as organized as we are now, and we had lost touch with a lot of the WASPs. So our job was monumental. Not only did we have this battle in Washington, D.C. to contend with, but we had to find members, and we had wonderful WASPs and also a lot of the instructors that helped us. They helped to locate the lost WASPs, and I know that Marty Weil had a lot to do with that because she was our historian at that time, and she kept records as much as possible, and she tried to get us together. So we had the problem of that. We also have financial problem. Our treasury was very small, and when they asked me if I would run for president of the organization, I said, what does it entail? And they said, it's completely honorary. I am going to shoot that woman. It was anything but that. It turned out to be a full-time job. So one of the better things that Bruce Arnold did was he said, I want every WASP out there to get to every newspaper and every television and every means that she could get publicity. And we had this huge album in our headquarters in Washington, D.C., and you were told to come as often as you could and visit your senator or your congressman, send us the newspaper articles. They had it broken down by states, and Lucia Wise had a lot to do with that. She did a lot of work at our headquarters in Washington, D.C. And so they would come to town, and then they would take this album to visit their congressperson and show them all of the publicity that we were getting. So it was really publicity that helped us. But finally, we did attain it, but there was huge opposition in both the House and the Senate. But Barry Goldwater had put us on as an amendment on one bill, and he was told that he had to take that off. And the only reason he did was because he got a written promise that we would have hearings. And that was I would say, the ultimate thing that did, because we got out of committee and onto the floor. And that is what helped us. But I can remember there were a lot of newspaper articles with headings, and one of the headings that I liked the best was, when is a military pilot not a military pilot? When she is a woman. So that was great.
Great. Jean, Dawn, what are your thoughts on that?
The question is?
The question was about the fighting for the recognition that you deserved.
Yes. Well, that was one step. And the next step was we became a veterans organization. And from that time on, we had so we have a nice relationship here. I followed B in '82, and when we had new bylaws, we created a new organization called Wasp World War II, Inc. And we had, instead of 3 members on the board, we had 7. We had regional directors. And so it became an interesting way of saying, how do we fit in with the veterans? And I think we've accomplished that through various things, and we've been rewarded. And certainly today, when we talk to the boys from the CAF, this wing, we're greeted as pilots, not women pilots, but pilots. And that is a rewarding feeling.
Yeah.
And I want to thank them for that. I also want to thank Jacqueline Cochran for opening the original door. Because without one, it takes one person, it's interesting, one person to just start something and to have as her legacy 1,074 women pilots. She deserves all of our applause in many ways. We just awarded her gold medal on Wednesday, the 29th of September, in Palm Desert, California. And a girl who was flying as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Air Force, the Air Force, flew from Germany to Palm Springs just to be there to make a statement in honor of Jacqueline Cochran's service, and flew back the next day to Germany to her squadron. Here we have women in the military flying all over the world, and to them we give our salute, because we may be now the storytellers and the keeper of the flame, but they will be the keeper of the flame in military aviation coming forth. And they are splendid young women. There's one here today from the Navy wearing wings, and perhaps she could be introduced. Yes, we congratulate you. Next year will be the 100th anniversary of naval aviation. I live a lake away from Hammondsport, New York, on Cuca Lake, where Glenn Curtis built the first airplanes the Navy bought. So it's a nice, long journey. Thank you.
I think you should consider, too, that we didn't start out to be pioneers. We didn't say, I'm going to be famous or I'm going to be anything. We did it because everybody our age were in the right place, or maybe the wrong place, the wrong time. But ask what they've done later. Not me, this isn't self-serving, but Dora Doherty, who did a great deal of research. They went on. They didn't say, well, they mistreated me, I'm going to go home and sulk. They had different lives. One of my baymates she went to Oxford for 10 years, went back, she's running a senior citizen center in California, and they've named it after her. And we don't stop. Just because we were told we couldn't do it doesn't mean we can't do something else. And I don't know that I'm done. Well, I'm done having the kids.
Don't forget, she's just our kid. She's only 86.
But we're still interested in what's happening. And the Dole Institute, as I read their brochures, their goal is to tell young people that you can do what you want to do. If you apply yourself, you can have anything you want, no matter where you came from, what your education is. Just have the spirit to do it. And that's our message to anybody. You want to fly? Fine. You want to dance? Fine. I only have one more thought. I was an only child. And all my life, I wanted a sister. Now I've got them.
Tell us your favorite flying story.
Oh. Can we boast?
Yes, absolutely. Please do, Dawn.
Should I start?
Sure.
All right. Well, I can see it right in my mind. And it helped me all through the time that my daughter is sitting there too, Amy Moran. And I would be cooking or doing whatever mothers do, you know. And I'd think, well, there I was, coming in for a landing, first solo night landing in the B-17, and Greenie's in right seat, I'm left seat. We have a crew chief on board, and he seems pretty content. He wasn't too careful. He wasn't obviously nervous. And the big old lights going around the field, and the blue little lights around marking the runway. And I had this overpowering feeling, I'm a pilot, and I had everything set up, you know, 4 engines, so everything was wonderful, and coming in, and I made this lovely landing. And I thought, you know, if a pilot can make a lovely landing, that's their day. And that sustained me for years and years.
That's great.
Talk about soloing. My first solo cross-country ever, not in the Wasp, but while I was flying the Taylorcraft. And I got to the destination, turned around and came back, and I should have been over the field, but somebody must have moved the field because it wasn't there. And if any of you have flown in the northern part of New Jersey, you have one little hill after another little hill after another and so forth, and they all look exactly alike. So I knew it was past time for me to be at the airport. I started to look on the ground to see where I could land, and I saw this beautiful long grass field And on one side of the road was a church, and on the other side of the road was a pub. So guess which one I went to? Well, a Taylorcraft, you couldn't, it had no electric starter. We had to pull the props through ourselves. So I went into the pub, found out where I was, took my charts out, charted my way back to the airport, and said, if I do this in a hurry, I'll get back before they even notice that I haven't been there. So I did that, brought the men out from the pub, put one in, told them to hold the brakes, and I'm pulling the prop through and pulling it through and pulling it through, and it wouldn't start. So I thought, uh-oh. Back into the pub, telephone, told them where I was, and thought to myself, this is the end of my flying days. They'll never let me fly again. Well, they came, and they started it with no trouble, and if I had been smart, I would have just waited for the engine to cool down a little bit, and I would have gotten it started. But instead of reprimanding me, they complimented me and said, you did the right thing. You found a field, you landed safely, found out where you were, and so forth. So that was my favorite solo.
Well, one of my baymates lived in Mexico, and she invited me and my family, as many as I wanted to bring, for Christmas. And I took 5 of the younger children, my husband and I, and we drove down, and she said, better hope for good weather, because it's 25 minutes in by plane and 25 hours by truck. So we did get in, and we got to fly out, and her husband had been an instructor and was a pilot for Rockefeller. So I'm riding with him. And we come in to land, and he says, Jean, you want to land the plane? And I looked down, it's a dirt runway, and I thought, I can do that. That's why I learned to fly. So here I go, I'm setting it up, and this is going to be perfect, this is going to be great. I made the best landing I ever made in my life. My daughter's sitting in the back seat, not that one. And she says, Mom's going to kill us all.
Oh, you are something.
Oh.
Oh,
Well, let's open it
Yeah.
up to your questions now. If you have a question, raise your hand. Somebody will bring a microphone by for you. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to ask these ladies questions. We have a hand over here and a hand back here. We have one over here too. Go ahead, Andrew.
Were any of the women, including yourselves, ever caught really in combat?
What?
No.
well, we carried 50 caliber machine gun bullets on board with the guns, and we were training gunners. So that's as close as I did get. One day the top turret gun jammed and slashed and opened up the nose of the gunner, student gunner, and we had to make a quick run to the field and call the ambulance. Okay. But that's as close as I ever got to anything. But we heard the guns were loud, I must say, and the top turret is almost over the 2 pilots in the 17, and the casings would ricochet off the aluminum fuselage and make a good racket. So.
I don't know if you would call this combat or not, but the women that ferried aircraft that had secret equipment aboard, such as the Norden bomb site, were issued firearms and taught how to shoot them, and told that wherever they landed, someone was out to come and guard the aircraft, and that if there wasn't someone there, that they were to stay with the aircraft. And if necessary, if someone came up suspicious and whatnot, they were to show their firearm and use it if necessary. I don't think that would classify as combat, but that was it.
The Wasp just served within the continental United States.
Canada. Mm-hmm.
Okay, other questions? I know we have a question right here.
For all you ladies, I'd like to know what your mothers thought about you being pilots, and were they supportive, or did they wish you were
Brothers or
doing
mothers?
something else?
My mother was very supportive. You know, she said if I was younger, I would do the same thing. And she came to Sweetwater for my graduation with my sister, and I still had a night cross country, and they allowed mothers and visiting relatives to come out to the field. So she was out there, and my friends took her out, and she saw me get in the airplane and get it started and so forth, and taxi away. And then the next day, I got a phone call from her, but her remark was, "I don't like the sound of that motor." Next day, I got a phone call from her, and she said, "Why didn't you call me when you got in last night?" And I said, "Mom, what do you think I've been doing here for 7 months?" So they were all behind me until I guess she saw what was going on.
Yeah, my mother was, she was thrilled. She was thrilled to think I'd fly. This is at Cornell. And then Dad said, he said, it's all right with me as long as you think you can do it. And what that meant was if you're going to work hard and really do your best. So that was his support. But Mother was great. And I did have a telephone call when I was in Lockburn learning the B-17, because apparently on the front page was a big picture of a B-17 from Lockburn that the oxygen had somehow exploded and the plane had caught fire on the ground. And my dad said, "Hello, Dawn? Yes, Dad, what's up? What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, what's wrong?" He said, "Why didn't you call me? Are you all right?" Because I didn't think. See, I didn't even know the paper had a photo. So. But it showed that he prayed every night, and he prayed on his knees by his bed. And he had 3 children in the war. My twin brothers were both in service, one a Marine and one in the Army.
Well, Mother wasn't for it, but my dad said if she pays for it herself, she can do it, so I paid for it myself. But I went to the interview in Cleveland, and my folks went with me. I was that young, and they sat through the interview. And when we came down the elevator, Mother said, "That was Boris Karloff in the elevator." And I think she associated that with everything I did after that.
Some of the young people may not remember Boris Karloff.
Come on now.
Other questions? You have a question here? And
I have
here.
a question about Amelia Earhart. I drive through Atchison
Yes.
frequently, or used to, and she's quite a big name up there, and I've read many controversial stories about how qualified she was, and I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are about her.
Well, I'd say that she was a good pilot. And she had a misfortune over the island. And she was a good friend of Jacqueline Cochran's. And Jacqueline Cochran had some concerns about her last flight. But did you know that there are quite a few WASPs honored at the Forest of Friendship in Atchison? And if you go to the New York State part of the walk, you can walk on me. It's right there. And quite a few of the WASPs are we're not entombed or whatever, but you could walk on our plaque.
I think she should get credit for the work she did in the settlement houses, because that was her real focus. And she met Putnam, and she was good advertising for him. And with the proper support, anybody can come off like that. But her work in the early women's suffrage business was spectacular.
She taught at Purdue, and we had some WASPs who actually were under her influence or took courses with her at Purdue. And she did a splendid job of carrying the torch for women. I hand it to her. She was a brave woman.
Yeah, I think we all admired her very much.
I'm looking forward to going to Atchison maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Okay, Andrew, you've got a question here.
I believe I learned from the documentary that was on PBS that the male pilots needed to be rated on one plane that they flew, but you needed to be rated on more than one because you ferried the planes.
It could be the difference in the command, the ferrying command versus the training command, yes.
Well, I think in the ferry command, they got to fly a variety of aircraft. Whereas in the training command, wherever you were stationed, that's what you flew.
Whatever's on the base.
So, you know, if the base changed, like we changed from UC-78s to B-25s, and had our program still been in existence, except for 11 days, I would have been flying the B-25. But it's whatever you were checked out in, then that's what you flew.
And you could be also, overseas pilots were usually a P-47, a P-51, a B-25, B-26. They were usually rated in that plane and flew that with their group.
I was making a speech to the sixth graders in Cleveland one time. And when you make speeches, especially kids, you pick out the one that's going to give you a hard time. And I saw him sitting back there. And he tried on my goggles, and he sort of laughed and looked at me, and he says, "And I suppose you think you could fly in Iraq today?" I said, "Oh, come on, look, I don't have a license anymore." I said, "No, I'm not qualified." But I said, "On this day, I want you to learn one lesson in this class. Make an old lady mad enough, and don't mess with her. She can fly a plane." So I know all about that. That's my grandma.
Were there, of the aircraft that you flew, were there any that were really physically heavy on the controls, and how did you handle that? And then a second question, how were you received by male pilots at the time?
Well, the first question, yes, the B-17 did not have any power assists. Everything was, but there was this magic called trim. And the ailerons and the rudder were both hip trim. So we had to, in this course, we had to fly with 2 and 3 engines out. And the instructor would pull an engine on takeoff or on climbing turns or wherever he thought. He wanted us to be very good and near the ground. And as soon as you lost an engine in that big aircraft, you had to jump on the trim. And it was a wheel that you could just, and once you did that, you were okay. But the other thing was you'd pull the wheel back to hold your altitude, and you'd put one, if you were using left rudder, you'd tuck your foot under the right rudder and pull back. So you had, while you're, meantime, using your hands to fix the trim. But once we learned how to trim, we'd be perspiring, and this is winter. This was December with lots of snow. In the Northeast, Cleveland was our alternate airfield, and Lockburn is Columbus, Ohio. And so we'd be perspiring in all this winter clothing, and he'd say, "Why are you working so hard?" So it was technique, but that was good. And we did squeeze tennis balls because the engines you adjust with your right hand and the wheel is with your left, so you're pulling back, and you had to have a certain amount of strength, upper body strength. So we had tricks to do with that. It was good. It was a beautiful aircraft. Never had to look for a field.
How did you guys have any interaction with male pilots, and how did they regard you?
I married one.
What about you, Bea?
I was very fortunate. I got along with people. I was accepted. I've always found that if you do your job and you don't try to throw your weight around or say how good you are and all that, and kind of mind your own business, you will eventually be accepted. So I got along fine, and they got along with me.
Okay. We have another question? Okay.
Hi, I was just going to ask, out of the 1,000, did you say 1,078 who graduated, 1,074 who graduated, how many of you are still with us today?
Under 300, right?
I think it's.
I think there's less than 200. We've lost 40 since the last record we kept. We put out
we lost 7 in 1 2-week period.
Yeah.
So we're falling fast.
Imagine. We feel young as ever inside,
We can't get our bodies to keep up with our minds.
Yeah.
Okay, Margarita?
Probably, Bill, this is more of a question for you and information for these 3 charming ladies. I wondered if you were aware in Tom Brokaw's book, he features a WASP, Margaret Ringenberger, and she came for the dedication of the Dole Institute and participated on several of the women's
Said Maggie, right?
She
We went to
participated.
Oshkosh a couple years ago, and she went in early, and she and Dawn went to a dinner, and we came up, Marty and I came up on the next day, and we walked in, and they took us back to the room, and they said, we have to tell you something. She didn't show up for breakfast, and they went down, and she was dead.
I just
And
was
that
going
really
to.
takes your breath away, you know.
Thank you, because I was going to Google to see if she was still alive. She
No.
participated
She
in
died at
several of the
Oshkosh
women's
2 years ago.
pandas.
I was
I
there
know
then
Marcia.
too. It was,
So you should have a film
was shock.
record of her.
Wonderful.
She's a special lady.
Yeah.
She is indeed.
excellent pilot.
My class, my friend.
I think we're going to take one more question, or should I take two more, guys? One more? Okay, one more question. We have one right here.
I'm with the Commemorative Air Force Jayhawk Wing in Wichita, and we just laid to rest Mickey Axton.
Oh, yes?
Yes.
And I just was wondering, did you ladies take any parachute training or have to jump out of any aircraft?
There's a parachute rigger sitting right over there for the Navy, and stand up so people can applaud you.
That's the one we want to get friends with.
Training we had was, they had this wooden platform, and the parachute's laying out, and they said, if something's wrong with your plane, get out, count to 10, and pull this cord. So we talked about that night after night after night. You got enough nerve to do that? You got enough nerve to do that? And one time I took off out of San Antonio, and my plane caught fire. I looked up, and the whole front end's on fire. And I had enough nerve, trust me. But I stood up on the seat, and I was ready to go, and I looked down, and I saw houses. And I thought, Gene, if you jump, you're in bigger trouble than if you sit in this thing. So I popped a stick. I don't know how I knew how to do that. And it put the fire out, and I was almost to the field, and I went back down. What I did wrong was, I didn't tell anybody, because I thought they'd blame me.
We wore chest packs in the B-17, and we had harnesses. And our instructor was, part of the course was to see how fast you could hook up, get out of the seat, hook up the parachute, and jump out. So, well, we didn't jump out, I mean, to the Bombay. So that's the only trick.
Well, Lorraine fell out.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, their instructor turned the plane over, she fell out. But she's got a caterpillar pin.
No, actually, she was solo. Because she
Really?
was at the
I
Air
thought-
Force Association, she told a story then. And she was inverted and in a flat spin. And the instructor said, you can never, ever get out of an aircraft when you're in that position. And they had a hearing, and he kept saying that, and she said, but I did. And so that after the hearing, she was afraid that she was going to wash out because of this. And they announced that she should appear the next day at operations to continue flying. And she said to her instructor, I don't understand. He said, they found out that the rudder cables had been cut. And that's what had put her in that position. And I guess just sheer desire and strength is what she said. I pulled that ripcord, and I didn't let go of that ripcord. And then when she got down on the ground and she was out, and there were a couple of cowboys that came galloping up, and they undid her clothes and whatnot and took her helmet off, and then they stepped back and they said, it's a little girl. So she still has that grip of the piece of the parachute that she, the ripcord, thank you.
Yes.
Well, another story we heard was that the gal also had to bail out, or bailed out accidentally. But she took her parachute and stretched it on the ground because she'd lost her shoes, and she didn't want to walk in the desert with the snakes. Oh dear, lots of stories, girls. Be careful.
Yeah. Well, B, Dawn, Jean, Kate, thank you for a terrific program today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. It's our honor.
I love that story.